It was just last year this space was renamed Liberty Square, a move seen as consistent with the Taiwanese government's aggressive, pro-independence stance. But after decades of difficult relations and periods in which conflict seemed a real possibility, Taiwan and the Chinese mainland seem to be on the verge of a new pragmatic relationship. And the main reason for that is this island's next president. I'm Hamish MacDonald, and on this edition of 101 East, we talk to Ma Ying-jeou, Taiwan's newly elected president. Ma Ying-jeou's proposal to engage China to stimulate a flagging economy swung voters away from decades of political and military standoff across the Taiwan Strait. But in the dying days of the campaign, China's crackdown in Tibet revived fears of greater mainland influence in Taiwan. At the last minute, Ma's platform looked like a liability. It was with some degree of excitement that supporters of Ma Ying-jeou greeted his election as president of Taiwan. In a landslide, the pro-Beijing leader of Kuomintang swept to power with 60% of the vote.
Waiting for this moment for 8 years.
There was an air of relief about these victory celebrations. Ma held a commanding lead in the polls for most of the campaign, but that began to slip in the days before the vote. His pitch to build closer ties with Beijing suddenly looked less appealing when Chinese authorities launched a tough crackdown on violent protests in Tibet, which drew international condemnation. The issue overtook the final moments of the campaign and provided Ma's opponent, Frank Scher from the DPP, with a poignant rallying cry.
To Beijing, there are 5 problems of independence. Tibet and Taiwan are among them. Therefore, for Beijing, Taiwan and Tibet stand together. And this way, people in Taiwan resent the fact that Beijing treats Tibet this way, although Beijing has been speaking softly towards Taiwan, but now people are very skeptical.
Professor Ling Chong-pin says the Tibet issue prompted a dramatic shift in the tone of Ma's rhetoric just days before the ballot.
What mainland Chinese authorities did in Tibet reminded us of what happened in 1989 in Tiananmen Square. So I think that is, so what they did, I think, is not only unwise, but actually stupid.
Balancing this need to move closer towards Beijing while maintaining Taiwanese sovereignty will be one of Ma's greatest challenges. The former mayor of Taipei has overcome corruption charges and his party's often fractious bid to reinvent itself to find his way into the presidential office. Ma, who was born in Hong Kong and educated at Harvard, has made some big promises, including a normalized trade relationship with the Chinese mainland and eventually a formal peace treaty.
But the ball is now in Beijing's court. It's up to Beijing to decide to what extent they are willing to respond favorably to the request made by President Ma.
There was plenty to celebrate for Ma's supporters on election night, but their hopes of a more pragmatic approach to cross-strait relations may be easily dashed if the new president fails to strike the right balance. Mr. Ma, thank you very much for talking to us and congratulations on your election victory. Let's start with the Tibet issue. What do you think of China's handling of the situation there over the past month?
Well, as you know, at the last few days before the election, I severely condemned the PRC's handling of the Tibet. And I said not only my condemnation, but also if they continue to suppress the Tibetan people and the situation in Tibet continue to worsen, we might consider not sending our Olympic teams to Beijing in August. But certainly that depends a lot on the development of the situation. We only are watching, but as you know, the international press has not been allowed to get into Tibet, so we know not very much about what happened over there. We certainly hope that they will stop suppressing and hope the order will be restored. And certainly, like many other countries, we hope they could start dialogue with Dalai Lama, because Dalai Lama hasn't advocate violence and hasn't advocate complete independence of Tibet.
You used quite strong language in the days before the election. You said that the Chinese handling of the situation was not only unwise, but actually stupid. Do you stand by those words now that you've been elected?
Do you know why? Because when they talk about Tibet, they said Tibet and Taiwan, all sacred territories of the People's Republic of China. I not only condemn their handling of Tibet, but also they mention Taiwan along with Tibet. So I keep telling people, particularly the press, that Taiwan is not Tibet, neither Taiwan is Hong Kong. Neither of these two places elect their own head of state or run their own business. But Taiwan is a democratic and prosperous country. So it's very different from either Hong Kong or Tibet. I want to make that clear, that point very clear. So,
but you weren't specifically talking about the language they used. You were talking about the way they'd handled the situation
both.
in Tibet. You said
the
it was
way
stupid.
they handle Tibet and the language they use to mention Taiwan and Tibet together, because not only because that is wrong, but because my opponent was taking advantage of that by criticizing that when Tibet, when the mainland China is the present Tibet, they also want to make Taiwan another Tibet. Now this is something that looks to me, now the two sides, mainland China and my opponent, are cooperating with each other. This is something that I cannot tolerate.
You've been elected with a strong mandate to build much closer ties with Beijing, with mainland China.
Mm-hmm.
How do you propose to do that, given that there are such fundamental differences between Taiwan and the authorities in mainland China on issues like human rights?
When we look at what happened in mainland China, their development in the last 20 or 30 years, you will see that they are moving gradually toward a more open society. But again, once you come to the question like Tibet or the Tiananmen Square incident, you will know that they do have some dark side, which we should not overlook. But again, mainland China is not like what they were 30 years ago. They have a multifaceted society, which we have treat different sector with a different attitude. Although we are still very much concerned about their human rights record, but that doesn't mean that we should stop trading with them or stop having a student exchange with them. No, as far as I'm concerned, just because they have some different ideas about human rights, we certainly should send more people over to do more trade in order to influence them and to make some change over there.
But are you still going to be able to make the sorts of comments that you've made in the past? Are you going to be able to continue to comment about the way China handles human rights?
Well, depending on the situation. For instance, in the last 18 or 19 years, I regularly attended the memorial ceremony for the June 4th incident on Tiananmen Square. I might still continue to do that, but maybe it will take a different format. But still, I'm very concerned about that. See, my attitude is derived from my general concern about human rights. And my attitude is actually using the same criteria. I use the same criteria to criticize the KMT's own record in the past. I think it's very important that human rights is a universal concern, which should be based on the same criteria.
Surely the best way to signal your intentions of closer ties would be for you to make an official visit to Beijing. Are you prepared to do that?
I don't have such plans at the moment, and I think we have hundreds of items of things to do in order to normalize our relation with the mainland in the economic field, in the cultural, educational, and in our security relationship. So at the moment, the situation does not require a personal visit of people like myself. We should let the lower echelon people to try to manage or solve the problem one by one. But when the time comes, then we will consider whether we will have the kind of sort of a state visit. But it's very difficult because of the relationship between Taiwan and the mainland is sensitive, but in a way it's unprecedented in the world.
But symbolism is going to be important though, isn't it?
Very important. In the past, they were our major threat, security threat. But at the moment, mainland China is not only a threat, but also an opportunity. Hundreds of thousands of Taiwanese are living, working on the Chinese mainland. And we are ready to allow hundreds of thousands of mainland tourists to come to Taiwan. So we will have a very complicated relationship with the mainland. In some areas, we may be critical of them, but in others, we may praise their progress.
Mr. Ma, we're going to take a break there. Do stay with us here on 101 East. After the break, we'll continue talking to Taiwan's newly elected president, Mr. Ma Ying-jeou.